Imagine a world where crowns were not won through brute strength or battlefield triumphs, but through the delicate, calculated moves of a master strategist hidden in the shadows. In the chaotic landscape of 15th century England, where noble houses clashed in bloody wars for the throne, one woman changed everything. Not a queen, nor a warrior, but a mother, Margaret Beaufort. She wielded no sword, yet forged a dynasty, using her intellect, patience, and cunning to propel her son to the throne, giving birth to the Tudor dynasty, one of England's greatest. Margaret's story is a testament to the power of women in a feudal society where they were often treated as property, traded like pawns on a political chessboard. But Margaret was no mere pawn. She was the master player, and her journey began in the most turbulent of times. Born on May 31st, 1443, at Bletsoe Castle, Bedfordshire, Margaret Beaufort entered a world already fractured by conflict. As the only child of John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, and Margaret Beauchamp, she inherited vast wealth and a contested claim to the English throne through her descent from John of Gaunt, third son of King Edward III. The Beauforts, legitimized descendants of Gaunt's initially illegitimate line, were barred from succession by Henry IV, yet their royal blood made them both powerful and vulnerable. This was an England on the brink. The 100 Years' War with France was faltering, fueling internal strife among nobles, and the weak rule of King Henry VI, a monarch plagued by mental illness, only deepened the chaos. Margaret was born into this maelstrom, where noble children were groomed as political tools, taught Latin, French, and household management. But few could have predicted that these lessons would transform her into a political genius. Just a year after her birth, tragedy struck. Her father, John Beaufort, died in 1444, possibly by suicide after a disastrous military campaign in France. This left Margaret, a mere infant, an orphaned heiress, a coveted prize in the volatile market of wardships and marriages. In medieval England, women and children had little agency. They were assets controlled by men, and Margaret was swiftly swept into that vortex. By age 7, she was briefly betrothed to John de la Pole, son of the Duke of Suffolk. A union dissolved when King Henry VI transferred her wardship to his half-brothers Edmund and Jasper Tudor. This was a calculated political move to bolster the Lancastrian cause Henry VI represented, tying the Beaufort bloodline to the Tudor family, a Welsh lineage with royal roots. At 12, Margaret was married to Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, a man twice her age. This marriage, consummated earlier than was customary for the time, when women typically waited until greater maturity for consummation, led to a harrowing pregnancy. In the cultural context, child marriages were not uncommon. They secured alliances and inheritances, but for Margaret it was a brutal ordeal. Edmund, a loyal Lancastrian warrior, was captured by Yorkist forces and died of plague in 1456, leaving Margaret, a 13-year-old widow, 7 months pregnant, and under the protection of her brother-in-law Jasper at Pembroke Castle. Picture the scene: a young girl, petite and fragile, grappling with the grief of losing her husband, while her body endured the agony of a prolonged labor. On January 28, 1457, she gave birth to Henry Tudor in a grueling delivery, likely complicated by her youth and small stature, which left her unable to bear more children. Henry became the center of her world, a boy carrying the hopes of the Lancastrian cause, but also a target for its enemies. In an era where childbirth mortality was staggering, roughly 1 in 3 women died in labor, Margaret's survival was a miracle, igniting in her a resilience and a fierce determination to protect her son at all costs. These experiences were not just personal tragedies. They reflected the gender inequalities of the late medieval period, where women like Margaret had to rely on wit to compensate for their lack of physical power. And from here, her true journey began, one that would lead to grander schemes, where she would transform from a victim of circumstance into the architect of destiny. The year is 1455, and England is a cauldron of betrayal, ambition, and blood. The Wars of the Roses have erupted, a savage struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York, each claiming the English throne through rival branches of the Plantagenet dynasty. At the heart of this turmoil stands Margaret Beaufort, a young widow of 13, clutching her newborn son, Henry Tudor, the last flicker of Lancastrian hope. Her royal blood makes her a prize, but also a target in a world where loyalty shifts like sand and a single misstep could mean death. Margaret is no warrior, yet she is thrust onto the board of this deadly game. A pawn, yes, but one who will learn to wield her position with devastating precision. In a society where women are expected to obey and fade into the tapestries of noble households, Margaret's journey through the Wars of the Roses reveals a woman navigating treacherous waters, forging alliances, and guarding her son's future with a quiet ferocity that belies her youth. After the death of her first husband, Edmund Tudor, in 1456, Margaret faced a precarious future. Pregnant and alone at Pembroke Castle, under the protection of her brother-in-law Jasper Tudor, she was a widow with a child who carried the weight of a disputed royal claim. The Wars of the Roses were not just battles fought on muddy fields like Towton, where rivers ran red with the blood of thousands. They were wars of lineage, where noble families schemed to secure their place in a fractured kingdom. Margaret's Beaufort heritage, tied to the Lancastrian cause through her descent from John of Gaunt, made her a valuable asset. Her wealth, vast estates inherited from her father, made her a target for marriage, a tool to bind alliances. But in this era, women were rarely players. They were prizes, their fates decided by men in smoky council chambers or on the battlefield. Margaret, however, would not remain a passive piece on the board. In 1458, at the age of 15, Margaret married again, this time to Sir Henry Stafford, a match arranged by Jasper to secure her safety and that of her son, Henry. Stafford, a respected Lancastrian knight, was a gentler figure than Edmund, and historical accounts suggest their marriage was marked by mutual respect, even affection, a rarity in an age where love was a luxury few nobles could afford. But the political tides were shifting. By 1461, the Yorkist Edward IV had seized the throne, deposing the frail Henry VI and plunging the Lancastrian cause into disarray. Margaret's shoe? In this chaos, Margaret's son, Henry Tudor, became a liability. At just 4 years old, he was torn from her care and placed under the wardship of William Herbert, a Yorkist supporter, in a calculated move to neutralize his Lancastrian claim. Imagine the anguish of a mother, separated from her only child, knowing his very existence made him a target. Margaret, now living under the Yorkist regime, had to tread carefully. She maintained a facade of loyalty to Edward IV, attending his court, dining with his allies, all while her heart burned for her son, exiled in all but name. Stafford's shifting allegiance to the Yorkists, a pragmatic choice to protect his family, gave Margaret a veneer of safety, but it was a delicate balance. She corresponded with Henry when possible, sending messages through trusted intermediaries, each word a lifeline to her distant son. Her survival depended on her ability to adapt, to smile at her enemies while plotting for her son's future. This was a world where a single rumor of disloyalty could lead to attainder, stripping of titles, lands, and even life. Margaret's second marriage to Stafford, lasting until his death in 1471, offered her a degree of stability, but it came at a cost. The Wars of the Roses were relentless. The Battle of Barnet in 1471, where Stafford fought for the Yorkists and was fatally wounded, was a brutal reminder of the era's volatility. Up to 14 Jinju. This was the crucible of Margaret's early life. Loss, separation, and constant vigilance. The Wars of the Roses were not just a backdrop, but a forge that tempered her resolve. She learned to navigate the deadly currents of court politics, to read men's intentions as keenly as a falconer reads the wind. Her piety, a deep well of faith that sustained her through these trials, was not just personal devotion, but a public performance, aligning her with the moral expectations of the time. In churches across England, women like Margaret were expected to embody virtue, their prayers and almsgiving, a shield against accusations of ambition or disloyalty. Her survival was a testament to her ability to play the game, to bend without breaking, and to keep her son's claim alive in her heart, even as he grew up far away, first in Wales and later in exile in Brittany. Margaret's third marriage, in 1472 to Thomas, Lord Stanley, was a masterstroke of strategy. Stanley was a wealthy and powerful noble, known for his ability to straddle the line between Lancaster and York without fully committing to either. His neutrality was a shield, protecting Margaret from the full wrath of the Yorkist regime, and his influence gave her a foothold in the shifting sands of power. Their marriage was less about affection and more about survival, a partnership that allowed Margaret to rebuild her network, to whisper in the right ears, and to keep Henry's cause alive from afar. Stanley's connections stretched across England, from the northern strongholds to the royal court, and Margaret used this to her advantage, cultivating allies in secret. She was a woman in a man's world, her every move calculated, her every letter to her son a risk. The Wars of the Roses were a chessboard, and Margaret was learning to play not just to survive, but to win. In the shadow of England's blood-soaked fields, where the Wars of the Roses claimed lives and loyalties with equal ferocity, Margaret Beaufort was forged into a political mastermind. By her late teens, she had endured the death of her father, the loss of her first husband, a harrowing childbirth, and the heart-wrenching separation from her only son, Henry Tudor. Each blow was a lesson, each betrayal a sharpening of her instincts. In a world where women were expected to embroider tapestries and bear heirs, Margaret learned to wield her intellect as a weapon, navigating a treacherous landscape with a blend of pragmatism, piety, and cunning. Her early experiences were not just trials, they were the crucible that shaped her into a strategist, capable of outmaneuvering kings and generals. This is the story of how Margaret's formative years taught her the art of survival, transforming her from a vulnerable pawn into a player who would rewrite England's destiny. The death of Margaret's father, John Beaufort, in 1444, when she was just a year old, was her first lesson in the fragility of power. A duke's title and vast estates could not shield him from disgrace or death, rumored to be by his own hand after a failed campaign in France. Growing up under her mother's care, Margaret absorbed the harsh realities of noble life. Status was a double-edged sword, granting privilege but inviting envy. Her mother, Margaret Beauchamp, a formidable woman in her own right, managed the family's estates with shrewdness, teaching her young daughter the importance of resilience and resourcefulness. In a society where women's roles were confined to marriage and motherhood, Margaret learned early that survival demanded more than compliance. It required calculation. Her brief betrothal at 7 to John de la Pole and her marriage at 12 to Edmund Tudor were not choices but transactions, orchestrated by men to secure alliances. These experiences seared into her a truth. In the Game of Thrones, a woman's agency lay in her ability to adapt and anticipate. The birth of Henry Tudor in 1457, when Margaret was just 13, was a defining moment. The labor was brutal, likely due to her youth and slight frame, and it left her physically scarred, unable to bear more children. In medieval England, where a woman's value was often tied to her fertility, this could have diminished her. Instead, it focused her purpose. Henry became her everything, the embodiment of the Beaufort legacy, the last hope of the Lancastrian cause. Protecting him in a world where royal blood invited danger required Margaret to master the art of discretion. While under the protection of Jasper Tudor at Pembroke Castle, she learned to read the intentions of those around her, to distinguish friend from foe in a court where smiles hid daggers. The fall of the Lancastrian king, Henry VI, in 1461, and the rise of the Yorkist Edward IV forced her to navigate a new reality. Her son, Henry, was taken from her and placed under Yorkist wardship, a calculated move to neuter his claim. Margaret's letters to him, carried by trusted messengers, were acts of defiance, each one a risk that could have branded her a traitor. Her second marriage to Sir Henry Stafford in 1458 was a pragmatic alliance, but it also offered Margaret a glimpse of stability and a partner who respected her intellect. Stafford's eventual shift to the Yorkist side, a survival tactic in a York-dominated England, taught Margaret the necessity of flexibility. She learned to play the loyal subject, attending Edward IV's court, dining with his allies, while secretly nurturing her son's cause. This duality, public compliance, private rebellion, became her hallmark. Stafford's death in 1471 at the Battle of Barnet, fighting for the Yorkists, was another blow, but it hardened her resolve. The Wars of the Roses were a masterclass in betrayal. The brief restoration of Henry VI in 1470-1471, only for him to be deposed and murdered, showed Margaret that power was fleeting unless fiercely defended. She began to see the world as a chessboard, where every move had consequences, and survival demanded foresight. Margaret's piety, a cornerstone of her character, was both a refuge and a strategic tool. In the late medieval period, religion permeated every aspect of life. The church was a moral arbiter, and women of Margaret's status were expected to embody Christian virtue through prayer, charity, and patronage. Margaret embraced this role, attending Mass daily, funding chapels, and later translating devotional texts. But her faith was more than spiritual. It was political. By presenting herself as a devout widow, she deflected suspicion, aligning herself with the ideal of the virtuous noblewoman. This was no mere act. Her belief was genuine, but it also served as armor in a world quick to accuse ambitious women of witchcraft or treachery. Her piety mirrored that of figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, another medieval woman who wielded influence through strategic marriages and public virtue, though Margaret's quieter, more calculated approach set her apart. Her third marriage to Thomas, Lord Stanley, in 1472 was a turning point. Stanley's ability to navigate the Wars of the Roses without fully committing to either side gave Margaret a powerful ally and a new platform. His vast estates and connections across England, from the northern marches to the royal court, allowed her to rebuild her influence. She began to cultivate a network of allies, from disaffected Yorkists to loyal Lancastrians, all while maintaining the appearance of neutrality. This period honed her ability to operate in the shadows, to whisper rather than shout, to plant seeds of rebellion without being seen. The constant upheavals, Edward IV's consolidation of power, the murder of Henry VI, the rise of Richard III, taught her that timing was everything. She learned to wait, to watch, to strike only when the moment was right. Margaret's early lessons in survival were not just about enduring loss. They were about understanding power's undercurrents. She saw how men underestimated women, dismissing them as weak or irrelevant, and she turned this to her advantage. Like a weaver at a loom, she began to thread together alliances, information, and opportunities, all centered on her son's future. Her experiences echo those of other women in history. Cleopatra, who used charm and intellect to secure Egypt's place among empires, or Empress Matilda, who fought for her own claim to the English throne in the 12th century. But Margaret's battlefield was not one of swords, but of minds, and her greatest weapon was her ability to endure, to plan, to outlast. As the 1470s gave way to the 1480s, she stood poised to transform her hard-won lessons into action, ready to orchestrate a rebellion that would shake the foundations of England. By 1483, England was a powder keg, and Margaret Beaufort held the spark. The Wars of the Roses had raged for nearly 3 decades, leaving the nation scarred and divided. Edward IV's sudden death in April of that year plunged the kingdom into fresh chaos, as his young son, Edward V, was declared king, only to be usurped by his uncle, Richard III. In this maelstrom of betrayal, Margaret Beaufort saw her chance. No longer the vulnerable girl of her youth, she had become a master of subtlety, her every move calculated to protect her son, Henry Tudor, and advance his claim to the throne. From the shadows, she wove a web of conspiracies and alliances, orchestrating a rebellion that would challenge the might of a crowned king. This is the story of Margaret's boldest gambit, her audacious partnerships, her secret plots, and her unrelenting drive to place her son on England's throne, proving that the sharpest weapons in war are forged not in steel, but in strategy. The death of Edward IV at 40, likely from illness exacerbated by his indulgent lifestyle, shattered the fragile stability of Yorkist rule. His 12-year-old son, Edward V, was swiftly declared king, but his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, moved with ruthless precision. By June 1483, Richard had declared his nephews, the young Edward V and his brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, the princes in the Tower, illegitimate, seizing the crown as Richard III. This brazen power grab alienated many Yorkists, creating a rift that Margaret, now 40 and married to the powerful but enigmatic Thomas, Lord Stanley, was quick to exploit. The court of Richard III buzzed with discontent, and whispers of rebellion grew louder. Margaret, with her keen understanding of human ambition, knew that a divided enemy was her greatest opportunity. Her son, Henry, now 26 and in exile in Brittany, was a distant figure, but a potent symbol of Lancastrian hope. Margaret's mission was clear: unite the fractured factions, rally support, and bring Henry home as king. Her most daring move came in the summer of 1483, when she forged an unlikely alliance with Elizabeth Woodville, Edward IV's widow and mother of the princes in the Tower. The two women, divided by years of enmity between Lancaster and York, shared a common enemy in Richard III. Elizabeth, grieving the loss of her son's inheritance and fearing for their lives, was a natural ally. Their collaboration was a masterclass in clandestine diplomacy, conducted through a trusted intermediary, Lewis Caerleon, a Welsh physician who shuttled messages between the women. Imagine the tension of those secret exchanges, coded letters passed in the dead of night, hidden in the folds of a cloak, or tucked into a medical satchel, each word a potential death sentence if intercepted. Margaret proposed a radical solution: betroth Henry Tudor to Elizabeth's daughter, Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring houses under a single banner. This audacious plan was more than a marriage; it was a political masterstroke, promising to heal the wounds of civil war and legitimize Henry's claim with Yorkist blood. The agreement galvanized support, drawing disaffected Yorkists and loyal Lancastrians to Margaret's cause. Margaret's ambition did not stop at matchmaking. She became a linchpin in a broader conspiracy known as Buckingham's Rebellion, led by Henry Stafford, 2nd Duke of Buckingham, a former ally of Richard III who had turned against him. Buckingham, a volatile figure with his own claim to the throne, saw Henry Tudor as a means to topple Richard. Margaret, through her husband, Stanley's connections, funneled money and information to the rebels, coordinating their efforts from her household in London. Picture her in a candlelit chamber, poring over maps and letters, her calm demeanor masking the high stakes of treason. The rebellion, launched in October 1483, aimed to overthrow Richard and place Henry on the throne. But the plot unraveled. Torrential rains flooded the countryside, scattering Buckingham's forces, and Richard's spies uncovered the conspiracy. Buckingham was captured and executed, his head displayed on a pike as a warning. Margaret's involvement was exposed, and she faced attainder, a punishment that could have stripped her of everything. Yet her husband Stanley's influence and his carefully maintained neutrality saved her from the worst. Richard confined her to house arrest under Stanley's custody, a lenient sentence that spoke to her cunning in keeping her allies close and her enemies closer. This setback did not deter Margaret. House arrest was a cage, but one with gaps she could exploit. She continued to communicate with Henry in Brittany, using trusted couriers to send funds and intelligence, ensuring he remained a viable threat. Her piety, ever a shield, grew more pronounced. She attended Mass, donated to churches, and cultivated an image of meek devotion, all while plotting with the precision of a general. The cultural context of the time amplified her strategy. The late 15th century saw the stirrings of humanism in England, with scholars like Erasmus beginning to challenge rigid hierarchies. Margaret, educated in Latin and theology, drew on these currents, presenting herself as a learned woman whose ambitions were cloaked in moral purpose. Her letters to Henry, filled with maternal warmth and coded instructions, reveal a woman balancing love with strategy, urging her son to prepare for invasion while assuring him of her prayers. Margaret's role in these conspiracies was not without risk. The fate of the princes in the Tower, who vanished from their prison by late 1483, cast a shadow over her actions. Some historians, like Philippa Gregory, speculate Margaret may have had a hand in their disappearance, seeing their deaths as a means to clear Henry's path to the throne. While no evidence directly implicates her, the rumor underscores her reputation for ruthlessness, a reputation she neither confirmed nor denied, letting it serve as a warning to her enemies. Her alliance with Stanley, whose loyalty wavered like a reed in the wind, was another gamble. Stanley's vast network gave her reach, but his reluctance to fully commit to any side kept her on edge. Yet Margaret thrived in this uncertainty, turning whispers into weapons and alliances into stepping stones. As 1483 gave way to 1485, she prepared for her greatest move yet, orchestrating the invasion that would bring Henry Tudor to Bosworth Field and change England forever. The year 1485 was a turning point for England, a moment when the tides of history shifted on the blood-soaked fields of Bosworth. Margaret Beaufort, now in her early 40s, had spent decades weaving a tapestry of alliances, enduring losses, and plotting with a patience that bordered on the divine. Her son, Henry Tudor, was no longer a distant dream, but a gathering storm, poised to challenge Richard III for the English throne. Margaret's role as the architect of this rebellion was hidden from the chronicles of men, yet her influence was undeniable. From the shadows, she orchestrated the final act of the Wars of the Roses, leveraging her husband's power, her own cunning, and a fragile coalition of rebels to secure her son's crown. This is the story of Margaret's triumph at Bosworth, her unparalleled influence as My Lady the King's Mother, and the whispers of controversy that linger around her legacy, a tale of victory won not with swords, but with strategy. By early 1485, Richard III's grip on the throne was faltering. His usurpation of the crown, the mysterious disappearance of the princes in the Tower, and his heavy-handed rule had eroded his support. Margaret, still under nominal house arrest after the failed Buckingham's rebellion, operated with the stealth of a seasoned conspirator. Her husband, Thomas, Lord Stanley, was a key figure in Richard's court, yet his loyalty was as slippery as the muddy fields of Leicestershire. Margaret used this ambiguity to her advantage, funneling resources to Henry Tudor in Brittany through secret channels. She coordinated with exiled Lancastrians and disaffected Yorkists. Her letters, disguised as pious correspondence, carrying coded messages of hope and strategy. The cultural landscape of the time, steeped in chivalric ideals and religious fervor, amplified her ability to operate unnoticed. A devout woman's letters were rarely scrutinized, allowing Margaret to build a network that spanned England and the continent. Henry Tudor landed at Milford Haven, Wales, on August 7, 1485, with a small force of French mercenaries and exiled supporters. Margaret's groundwork was crucial. She had rallied Welsh lords, leveraging Henry's Tudor heritage, and secured promises from English nobles weary of Richard's tyranny. The Battle of Bosworth, on August 22, 1485, was the climax of her efforts. Richard III, commanding a larger army, seemed poised for victory, but Margaret's strategic alliances tipped the scales. Thomas Stanley and his brother, Sir William Stanley, held a separate force, their allegiance uncertain until the critical moment. As Richard charged toward Henry on the battlefield, the Stanleys made their move, turning against the king and sealing his fate. Richard was cut down, his crown retrieved from a hawthorn bush and placed on Henry's head. This moment, immortalized in legend, was as much Margaret's victory as her son's. Without her years of planning, her cultivation of Stanley's influence, and her ability to unite disparate factions, Henry VII would not have worn the crown. With Henry's coronation, Margaret's role transformed. As My Lady the King's Mother, she wielded a level of influence unprecedented for a woman who was not queen. She signed documents as Margaret R., a nod to regal authority, and held court as a de facto queen dowager. Her legal status as femme sole, a rare privilege granting her autonomy over her wealth and actions, allowed her to amass estates and exert power independent of her husband. This was revolutionary in a society where women's property was typically controlled by men. Margaret's influence extended to the heart of Henry's court, where she advised on matters of state, arranged noble marriages, and shaped the Tudor image. Her piety, always a cornerstone, became a public spectacle. She founded chantries, supported religious houses, and later translated devotional works, such as The Mirror of Gold for the Sinful Soul. These acts were not just expressions of faith, but calculated moves to cement the Tudor dynasty's legitimacy, aligning it with divine favor in a deeply religious age. Yet, Margaret's triumph was not without shadows. The disappearance of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother, remained a stain on the era. While Richard III is often blamed, some chroniclers and modern historians, like Philippa Gregory, have speculated about Margaret's involvement. The prince's deaths, if indeed they were murdered, cleared a significant obstacle from Henry's path. No direct evidence ties Margaret to the crime, but the rumor itself, whispered in the halls of power, underscored her reputation as a woman who would stop at nothing to secure her son's future. This ambiguity added to her mystique. Was she a ruthless schemer or a devoted mother pushed to extremes? The truth remains elusive, but the controversy highlights the stakes of her world, where survival often demanded moral compromises. Margaret's influence also reshaped the cultural landscape. The late 15th century saw the dawn of the Renaissance in England, with printing presses spreading knowledge and humanism, challenging old hierarchies. Margaret embraced this shift, patronizing scholars and founding Christ's College and St. John's College at Cambridge, institutions that would shape generations. Her educational patronage was both a personal passion and a political statement, signaling the Tudors' commitment to progress and stability. Her household became a hub for intellectuals, much like the courts of Italian patrons like Isabella d'Este, though Margaret's focus remained firmly on England's future. She was a bridge between the medieval and the modern, her piety rooted in tradition, her actions forward-thinking. Her relationship with Henry VII was the heartbeat of her power. Unlike many noble mothers who faded into obscurity after their sons' ascensions, Margaret remained a constant presence. She negotiated his marriage to Elizabeth of York, fulfilling her earlier pact with Elizabeth Woodville and uniting the warring houses. Their union produced heirs, including the future Henry VIII, securing the Tudor line. Margaret's warmth toward her son, evident in surviving letters, was tempered by a fierce protectiveness. She was not just a mother, but a co-strategist, her counsel shaping the early Tudor court. Yet she knew the value of discretion, stepping back from the spotlight to let Henry shine, all while pulling strings from the shadows. As the dust of Bosworth settled, Margaret stood as a towering figure, her legacy woven into the fabric of England's new dawn. She had transformed from a child bride into a political titan, her life a testament to the power of resilience and intellect in a world that sought to confine her. But her story was not yet complete. Her final years would cement her place in history, not just as a king's mother, but as a visionary who reshaped a nation. The year is 1509, and Margaret Beaufort, now 66, stands at the twilight of her life, her gaze fixed on the dynasty she has built. The Wars of the Roses are a fading scar, replaced by the stability of the Tudor dynasty, with her son, Henry VII, reigning as a king who brought peace to a fractured England. Margaret, known as My Lady the King's Mother, is no mere footnote in this story. She is its architect, a woman who turned adversity into opportunity, weaving a legacy that would endure for centuries. Her life, marked by loss, cunning, and unyielding devotion to her son, is a testament to the power of a woman who operated in the shadows of a man's world. This final chapter explores Margaret's enduring contributions, her role as a patron of education and piety, and the indelible mark she left on history, a legacy that challenges us to rethink the role of women in shaping nations. With Henry VII's reign secure, Margaret's influence as a political and cultural force only grew. As femme sole, a rare legal status granting her control over her vast estates, she wielded wealth and authority unmatched by most women of her time. Her signature, Margaret R., hinted at regal power, and she used it to shape the Tudor court's image. She was a constant presence, advising Henry on matters of state, from diplomacy to noble marriages, ensuring the dynasty's stability. Her orchestration of Henry's marriage to Elizabeth of York had united Lancaster and York, producing heirs like Henry VIII and Margaret Tudor, whose descendants would shape England and Scotland. Yet Margaret's power was not ostentatious. Unlike queens who dazzled with crowns, she operated with quiet precision, her influence felt in council chambers and private letters. Her ability to balance public humility with private authority was a masterclass in medieval statecraft, echoing the subtle power of figures like Empress Matilda, who fought for her own claim centuries earlier, but with a distinctly Tudor finesse. Margaret's piety, a thread woven through her life, became a cornerstone of her legacy. In an age when the church was the heartbeat of society, her devotion was both personal and political. She attended Mass daily, funded chantries, and translated devotional works, such as The Imitation of Christ, making spiritual texts accessible to a wider audience. Her charitable acts, endowing hospitals and supporting the poor, were not just acts of faith, but strategic moves to align the Tudors with divine favor. The late 15th and early 16th centuries saw England on the cusp of the Renaissance, with printing presses and humanism spreading new ideas. Margaret embraced this shift, using her wealth to patronize scholars and promote learning. Her most enduring contribution was her patronage of education. She founded Christ's College in 1505 and St. John's College at Cambridge, institutions that would educate generations of scholars, including Reformation thinkers like Erasmus. These acts were revolutionary, positioning her as a visionary who saw knowledge as a pillar of power, much like Italian patrons such as Lorenzo de' Medici, but rooted in England's emerging identity. Her legacy, however, is not without its shadows. The mystery of the princes in the Tower, who vanished in 1483, continues to haunt her story. While Richard III is the primary suspect, some historians speculate Margaret's involvement, suggesting she may have seen their elimination as necessary to secure Henry's claim. No concrete evidence supports this, but the rumor itself, fueled by her reputation for ruthless determination, adds complexity to her character. Was she a cold-blooded strategist, or a mother driven to extremes by love and ambition? The truth lies buried in history's silence, but the controversy underscores the high stakes of her world, where survival often demanded moral ambiguity. Margaret neither confirmed nor denied these whispers, letting them amplify her mystique, a silent warning to those who might challenge her son's rule. Margaret's final years were marked by a poignant blend of triumph and loss. She outlived her son, Henry VII, who died in April 1509, a rare feat for a medieval mother. She oversaw the coronation of her grandson, Henry VIII, on June 24, 1509, a moment of quiet victory as she watched the Tudor dynasty take root. Yet, just days later, on June 29, 1509, she died, her body weakened but her spirit unbroken. Her death at Westminster marked the end of an era, but her influence lingered. Her colleges at Cambridge continued to shape intellectual life, and her charitable works inspired future generations. Her life challenged the medieval notion that women were mere vessels for male ambition, proving that a mother's love could forge an empire. In reflecting on Margaret's legacy, we see a woman who transcended her time. She was not a warrior like Joan of Arc, nor a queen like Elizabeth of Visscher, yet her impact rivals theirs. She navigated a world that sought to confine her, turning constraints into opportunities. Her story resonates today, echoing in modern figures who wield influence behind the scenes. Think of political strategists or philanthropists who shape history without seeking the spotlight. Margaret Beaufort was a political mastermind, a mother who built a dynasty not with swords, but with intellect, faith, and an unshakable will. As we stand in the shadow of her achievements, we are reminded that the most enduring power often lies not in those who wear the crown, but in those who place it on another's head. Her legacy is England itself, a nation reshaped by a woman who dared to play the game of thrones and won.